The rustle of autumn wind stirred the dust outside the weathered window of Mabel Zimmerman's small boarding house room, as she pressed trembling fingers against the purple bruise blooming beneath her eye. 3 years since she'd fled Chicago, and still the ghosts of her past followed her to Nome, Colorado, a town so small it seemed impossible anyone could find her here. "Won't be showing my face at the general store today," Mabel whispered to herself, turning from her reflection. At 24, she had already lived several lifetimes of sorrow. First losing her parents to influenza when she was 16, then the disastrous marriage to Harold Beckman, a man whose charming smile had hidden the monster beneath. The year was 1879, and opportunities for a woman alone were scarce. Mabel had managed to secure a position as a seamstress for Mrs. Peterson, the undertaker's wife, which allowed her to rent this small room and keep to herself. That's how she preferred it now, alone, invisible, safe. A knock at her door startled her, and Mabel instinctively pressed herself against the wall, her heart hammering wildly in her chest. "Miss Zimmerman." Mrs. Holloway's voice came through the door. "You've got a torn dress waiting downstairs. Mrs. Wilson needs it fixed by tomorrow for her daughter's birthday." "I'll be right down," Mabel called, relieved it wasn't Harold somehow tracking her down. Even after she'd managed to get a divorce on grounds of cruelty, a nearly impossible feat that had cost her every penny she'd saved, she still lived in fear he would find her. Mabel dabbed a bit of powder over the bruise, courtesy of a drunken miner who had cornered her in the alley behind the general store yesterday. She'd managed to escape before things got worse, but the encounter had reopened old wounds, reminding her that men couldn't be trusted and that she was safest keeping to herself. "Downstairs, Mrs." Holloway handed her the torn dress with a sympathetic look that told Mabel her powder wasn't hiding much. "That's quite a shiner you've got there." "Walked into a door," Mabel lied, taking the dress and avoiding eye contact. Mrs. Holloway's lips thinned. "Well, there's a new arrival in town. Bought the old Davidson ranch. I hear he's looking for someone to help with mending and such. Pays better than what you make with Mrs. Peterson." "I'm fine with my current arrangement," Mabel said quickly. The last thing she wanted was to be isolated on a ranch with a strange man. "Suit yourself," Mrs. Holloway shrugged. "Though Quinn Vaughn seems a decent sort, polite, keeps to himself." Mabel nodded, already retreating up the stairs with the dress. She'd learned the hard way that seeming decent meant nothing. 2 days later, Mabel was carefully navigating the muddy Main Street after a spring rain when a runaway wagon came barreling around the corner. She froze in terror as the horses charged toward her, the driver nowhere to be seen. Strong arms suddenly wrapped around her waist, yanking her out of harm's way. She landed against a solid chest as the wagon careened past, splashing mud in its wake. "You all right, madam?" A deep voice rumbled. Mabel pushed away instantly, heart racing as she looked up at her rescuer. He was tall, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a summer storm. His clothes were practical but clean-worn denim pants, a blue cotton shirt, and a tan Stetson that he removed as he regarded her with concern. "I'm fine," she said stiffly, stepping back further. "Thank you." "Quinn Vaughn," he introduced himself with a slight tip of his head. "Just moved to town." So this was the man Mrs. Holloway had mentioned. Up close, he looked even more intimidating, broad-shouldered and solid as an oak, though his expression was gentle. "Mabel Zimmerman," she replied reluctantly, knowing it would be rude not to introduce herself after he'd likely saved her life. "Pleased to meet you, Miss Zimmerman." His eyes flicked briefly to the fading bruise beneath her eye before returning to meet her gaze. Something in his look, not pity but a quiet understanding, made her uncomfortable. "I should be going," she said, already backing away. Of course. He nodded, replacing his hat. Be careful out there. Mabel hurried away, feeling his eyes on her back. Something about Quinn Vaughn unsettled her, but not in the way Harold's presence had. It was the way he'd looked at her, as if he saw more than she wanted anyone to see. That evening, as Mabel sat by her window stitching Mrs. Wilson's dress, she spotted Quinn leaving the general store, his arms full of supplies. He paused to help old Mrs. Jenkins load her purchases into her wagon, then continued down the street, exchanging polite nods with townspeople. For someone who supposedly kept to himself, he seemed to navigate social interactions with ease. 3 days passed before Mabel encountered Quinn again. She was delivering a mended jacket to Sheriff Collins when Quinn entered the office, his expression serious. "Sheriff, I've got concerns about those cattle rustlers that hit the Montgomery spread," he was saying, before noticing Mabel and stopping short. "Pardon me, Miss Zimmerman. I didn't mean to interrupt." Sheriff Collins waved away his concern. "Miss Zimmerman was just dropping off my jacket." "Fine work as always, Mabel." Mabel nodded, uncomfortable with both men's eyes on her. "I'll be going then." "Actually," Quinn said, "I was hoping to speak with you. I've got some shirts that need mending, and Mrs. Holloway mentioned you might be able to help." Mabel hesitated. She needed the money. Mrs. Peterson's work wasn't steady enough, but the thought of going to a man's ranch alone set alarm bells ringing, seeming to read her thoughts. Quinn added, "You could work at Mrs. Holloway's if that's more comfortable. I can bring the items to town." Sheriff Collins looked between them with interest. "Vaughn here's been a good addition to our community. Helped track down the Jenkins boy when he wandered off last week." Mabel bit her lip. "I suppose I could look at your shirts. Bring them by Mrs. Holloway's tomorrow." Quinn's smile transformed his face, softening the hard lines. "Much obliged, Miss Zimmerman." As promised, Quinn arrived the next morning with a bundle of shirts and a pair of trousers with a torn knee. Mrs. Holloway hovered nearby, clearly curious about the interaction. "These have seen better days," Mabel commented, examining the worn fabric. "I'm hard on clothes," Quinn admitted. "Ranch work isn't gentle." "Neither is running after runaway wagons to rescue foolish women," Mabel said before she could stop herself. Quinn's laugh was unexpected, warm, and genuine. "Nothing foolish about being in the wrong place at the wrong time." Mabel named her price, expecting him to haggle, but he simply nodded and placed the money on the table. "When might they be ready?" 3 days, Mabel said. "I have other work to finish first. No rush." Quinn turned to leave, then paused. "Miss Zimmerman, I'm having some trouble with the cabin. The previous owner left curtains that have seen better days. I wonder if you might recommend fabric for replacements." Mabel looked at him suspiciously. Was this some kind of ploy? "The Mercantile has decent options. Mrs. Tucker can advise you." "Much obliged," Quinn said, tipping his hat. "Good day, ladies." After he left, Mrs. Holloway turned to Mabel with raised eyebrows. "He seems quite taken with you." "He seems in need of a seamstress," Mabel corrected, gathering the clothes and heading upstairs. Over the next few weeks, Quinn found more reasons to seek Mabel's services. A torn saddle blanket, a rip in his winter coat that needed patching before fall arrived. Each time he was unfailingly polite, never pressuring her or making untoward comments. He paid fairly and promptly, sometimes bringing her small gifts, fresh eggs from his chickens, a jar of honey from a wild hive he'd found. Despite her resolve to keep her distance, Mabel found herself watching for him through her window, listening for his distinctive footsteps on the boarding house stairs. He was different from other men she'd known. There was a quietness to him, a patience that didn't demand attention. One rainy afternoon in June, Mabel was returning from delivering a dress to the mayor's wife when she slipped on the muddy boardwalk. Pain shot through her ankle as she fell, and she bit back a cry. "Need a hand?" Quinn's voice came from behind her. He'd seemingly appeared from nowhere, as he often did when she was in trouble. "I'm fine," Mabel insisted, trying to stand, but her ankle buckled. Without asking permission, Quinn lifted her easily as if she weighed nothing at all. "Doctor's office is just down the street. Put me down." Mabel protested, mortified as townspeople stared. "And let you hop there on one foot in the mud?" Quinn raised an eyebrow. "Seems inefficient." Before she could argue further, they were at Dr. Mitchell's door. Quinn shouldered it open and carried her inside, explaining the situation to the doctor's surprised wife. "It's probably just a sprain," Dr. Mitchell said after examining her ankle. "Stay off it for a few days, keep it elevated." Mabel's heart sank. She had 3 dresses to finish by the weekend. "I can't afford to rest, doctor." Quinn, who had been waiting in the corner, spoke up. "I can bring your work to the boarding house and return it when it's done. Save you the walking." "That's very kind, but no buts," Quinn interrupted gently. "Neighbors help each other in Nome." "That's why we choose small towns over cities, isn't it?" The way he emphasized cities made Mabel wonder if he somehow knew she'd come from Chicago. But she couldn't imagine how, true to his word, Quinn arranged with Mrs. Peterson and her other clients to collect and deliver Mabel's work over the next week. He also brought her meals from the restaurant, claiming Mrs. Holloway was too busy to cook properly for an invalid. "You don't have to do all this," Mabel said one evening as Quinn set a tray with beef stew and fresh bread on her bedside table. "I know." He pulled a chair closer to her bed, maintaining a respectful distance. "But I want to." "Why?" The question had been burning in her mind for days. Quinn was silent for a moment, looking out her window at the sunset painting the mountains gold and crimson. "When I first came to town, folks helped me get settled. I'm just paying it forward." Mabel sensed there was more to it than that, but didn't press. "Well, thank you. I don't know how I would have managed otherwise." "You'd have found a way," Quinn said with certainty. "You strike me as a woman who always finds a way to survive." Something in his tone, admiration without pity, made tears prick at Mabel's eyes. She blinked them away quickly. "Tell me about your ranch," she said, changing the subject. Quinn smiled, seemingly pleased by her interest. "It's not much yet. 50 acres, mostly grazing land. Small cabin that needs work. 5 cows, 2 horses, and some chickens. Previous owner let it go to seed, but the bones are good." "Why Nome?" Mabel asked. "It's hardly the center of the cattle industry. Wanted somewhere quiet, somewhere I could build something that's mine." He hesitated. "Left some ghosts behind in Texas." Mabel nodded, understanding that sentiment all too well. As her ankle healed, Mabel found herself missing Quinn's daily visits. He still brought work occasionally, but with her mobility restored, there was no reason for their extended conversations. Then one Sunday morning, Quinn appeared at the boarding house door with his wagon. "Beautiful day for a drive," he announced. "Thought you might like to see the ranch now that you're feeling better." Mabel hesitated. Going alone to a man's property went against every rule she'd set for herself. Sensing her unease, Quinn added, "Mrs. Holloway is coming too. She's bringing a picnic lunch." Indeed, the landlady appeared behind him, basket in hand. "It'll do you good to get some fresh air, Mabel. You've been cooped up too long." With Mrs. Holloway as chaperone, Mabel agreed. The ride out of town was pleasant, the July sun warm but not oppressive. Quinn pointed out landmarks along the way, sharing stories he'd learned from locals about the area's history. The ranch was modest but lovely, nestled in a small valley with mountains rising behind it. The cabin, though weathered, had a solid look about it. A small garden was beginning to flourish beside it, It's beautiful, Mabel said honestly. It needs work, Quinn replied, but it has potential. Mrs. Holloway insisted on showing Mabel the inside of the cabin while Quinn tended to the horses. It was simple but meticulously clean, with sturdy furniture, and Mabel noticed with surprise curtains made from fabric she'd recommended at the mercantile. He asked for my help with those, Mrs. Holloway confided. Man can break a wild horse but can't sew a straight stitch to save his life. They ate lunch under a large cottonwood tree, the conversation flowing easily. Quinn shared stories of his cattle driving days, making them laugh with tales of ornery cows and greener-than-grass cowboys. "What brought you to Colorado from Texas, Mrs. Holloway asked, voicing the question Mabel had been wondering. A shadow passed over Quinn's face. "Lost my wife and son to fever 3 years ago. Couldn't stay in a place with so many memories." Mabel's heart clenched at the pain in his voice, so he understood loss too. "I'm sorry," she said softly. Quinn nodded, his eyes meeting hers with shared understanding. "Life goes on even when we think it can't." After lunch, Quinn showed them the small herd of cattle grazing nearby, the chicken coop he'd built, and the vegetable garden he was nurturing. "You've done all this yourself?" Mabel asked, impressed. "Mostly. Hired help for the barn raising. Planning to expand next spring if this year's calves fetch a good price." As they prepared to leave, Quinn pulled Mabel aside. "I've been meaning to ask. The town's having a dance next Saturday. Would you consider attending with me?" Mabel froze, panic rising in her chest. A dance meant being close, being watched, being judged. "I don't dance," she said stiffly. "Neither do I, really," Quinn admitted with a small smile. "2 left feet, according to my sister. But I thought it might be nice to have company while watching others make fools of themselves." His self-deprecating humor eased her tension slightly, but still she hesitated. "Just as friends," Quinn added, seeing her discomfort. "No expectations." "I'll think about it," Mabel finally said, which seemed to satisfy him. On the ride back to town, Mrs. Holloway leaned close to Mabel. "That man is sweet on you, girl." "He's just being kind," Mabel protested. "Quinn Vaughn could have his pick of the unmarried women in this county, Mrs. Holloway said bluntly. "Half the widows too, but he only has eyes for you." "Then he needs spectacles," Mabel muttered. "I'm nothing special." Mrs. Holloway gave her a long look. "We all have stories we don't tell, Mabel. Whatever yours is, it doesn't define who you are now." That night, Mabel lay awake thinking about Quinn's invitation. It had been so long since she'd allowed herself any kind of social pleasure. Harold had isolated her in Chicago, convincing her that she was awkward and embarrassing in public, then punishing her for imagined flirtations when they did go out. But Quinn wasn't Harold, and Nome wasn't Chicago. The next morning, Mabel found herself walking to Quinn's ranch before she could lose her nerve. She'd ask him about the dance, tell him she'd changed her mind. It was a simple social outing, nothing more. As she approached the property, she heard angry voices. Quinn stood near his barn, facing 3 rough-looking men on horseback. "This land is rightfully ours," one was saying. "Davidson had no right to sell it." "I have the deed properly filed," Quinn replied calmly. "If you have a claim, take it to the court in Denver." "Courts favor men like you," another spat. "We know what really happened to Davidson." "I bought this property legally," Quinn said, his voice hardening. "Now I suggest you leave before this gets unpleasant." The leader of the group noticed Mabel standing frozen at the edge of the yard. "Well, look what we have here. You entertaining ladies now, Vaughn." Quinn turned, his eyes widening at the sight of Mabel. "Miss Zimmerman is a respected member of the community," he said firmly. "You'll speak of her with respect or not at all." "Seems we hit a nerve," the man sneered, dismounting. "Pretty little thing, ain't she?" Fear shot through Mabel as the man approached her. She'd seen that look before in Harold's eyes, in the eyes of the miner who'd given her the bruise. "That's far enough," Quinn said, stepping between them. His hand rested on his holstered pistol. "You willing to die over a woman, Vaughn?" the man asked. "Are you?" Quinn countered. For a tense moment, Mabel was certain violence would erupt. Then the man laughed, stepping back. "Another day, perhaps." He turned to his companions. "Let's go, boys. Mr. Vaughn needs time to reconsider our offer." After they'd ridden away, Quinn turned to Mabel, his face tight with concern. "Are you all right?" "Who were they?" Mabel asked, still shaking. "The Harmon brothers. They've been causing trouble since I arrived. Claim Davidson promised them first right to buy the land if he ever sold." Quinn guided her to the porch. "What brings you out here alone, Mabel? It's not safe." "I came to tell you I'd go to the dance," she said, feeling foolish now. "But clearly you have more important matters to worry about." Quinn's expression softened. "Nothing's more important than that news." He smiled, though concern still shadowed his eyes. "Let me saddle my horse. I'll take you back to town." On the ride back, Quinn explained more about the Harmon brothers' local troublemakers who had been squatting on parts of what was now his land before he bought it. "Sheriff knows about them?" Mabel asked. "Sheriff can't do much unless they break a law," Quinn replied. "So far, it's just threats." "You should be careful," Mabel said, surprising herself with how much the thought of Quinn being hurt bothered her. Quinn glanced at her, something warm in his eyes. "Does that mean you care what happens to me, Miss Zimmerman?" Mabel felt her cheeks heat. "It would be a shame to lose my best customer," she said primly. His laugh warmed her more than the summer sun. The week leading up to the dance was busy for Mabel. Several women wanted dresses altered for the event, and she worked late into the night to finish them all. Quinn stopped by twice. Once to bring her a book he thought she might enjoy, Wuthering Heights, and once to confirm the time he'd pick her up on Saturday. Each visit left Mabel more confused about her feelings. She found herself looking forward to seeing him, even as part of her remained wary. Harold had been charming too at first, but Quinn never pushed for more than she was willing to give. He seemed content with their growing friendship, never trying to touch her or make suggestive comments. He asked questions about her interests and actually listened to her answers, remembered details she mentioned in passing. Saturday evening arrived, and Mabel stood before her mirror in the one good dress. She owned a simple blue cotton with white trim that she'd made herself. She'd pinned her dark hair up, allowing a few curls to frame her face. A knock at her door announced Quinn's arrival. He stood in the hallway looking uncharacteristically nervous, dressed in his best clothes, black pants, a crisp white shirt, and a black vest. He'd even polished his boots. "You look beautiful," he said, his voice sincere. "Thank you," Mabel replied, accepting his offered arm with only slight hesitation. The town hall was decorated with paper lanterns and wildflowers. A small band played lively tunes in the corner, and couples already filled the dance floor. Mabel tensed as they entered, anticipating whispers and stares, but people merely nodded and smiled in greeting. "Punch?" Quinn asked, guiding her to a table. "Please." Mabel watched him walk away, noticing how several young women followed him with their eyes. Mrs. Holloway was right. Quinn could have his pick of company. Why he chose hers remained a mystery. The evening progressed pleasantly. True to his word, Quinn didn't pressure her to dance, though she eventually agreed to a slow waltz. His hand at her waist was light, respectful, and he maintained a proper distance between them as they moved around the floor. "Thank you for coming tonight," Quinn said as the music ended. "I know social gatherings aren't your favorite." "How did you know that?" Mabel asked, surprised. "I notice things," Quinn said simply. "The way you slip out of church before the social hour, How you always find a reason to decline Mrs. Peterson's invitations to Sunday dinner. You've been watching me, Mabel said, unsure whether to be flattered or alarmed. Not in a bothersome way, I hope, Quinn replied. It's just, you intrigue me, Mabel Zimmerman. Before Mabel could respond, a commotion at the door drew their attention. The Harmon brothers had arrived, clearly drunk and looking for trouble. Evening, folks. The oldest Mabel now knew his name was Edgar called out. Room for a few more at this fine gathering. Sheriff Collins approached them. You boys are welcome if you behave yourselves. Always do, Sheriff, Edgar said with a mock salute. His eyes scanned the room, stopping when they landed on Quinn and Mabel. Well, if it isn't the high and mighty Mr. Vaughn. Quinn stepped slightly in front of Mabel. Evening, Edgar. Thought we'd join the festivities, Edgar slurred, since we're all neighbors and such. Plenty of room for everyone, Quinn said neutrally. Edgar's gaze shifted to Mabel. And who's this pretty thing? Don't think we were properly introduced at your ranch. Miss Zimmerman, Quinn said, his voice tight. My guest for the evening. Lucky man, Edgar said, his tone making the words sound like an insult. Dance with me, Miss Zimmerman. No, thank you, Mabel said firmly. Edgar's face darkened. Too good for the likes of me, the lady declined, Quinn said. I suggest you respect her wishes. For a tense moment, Mabel thought Edgar might cause a scene. Then his younger brother tugged his arm, whispering something, and Edgar backed away with a mocking bow. Another time, perhaps, he said, before joining his brothers at the refreshment table. Quinn turned to Mabel. I'm sorry about that. Would you like to leave? And let them think they scared us off, Mabel found herself saying. I don't think so. Quinn's smile was approving. Another dance, then. They managed to enjoy the rest of the evening despite the Harmon brothers' presence. Quinn kept Mabel on the opposite side of the room, and Sheriff Collins stayed close to the troublemakers. By the time Quinn escorted Mabel home, the incident had faded to a minor annoyance. I had a lovely time, Mabel said honestly as they stood outside the boarding house. Thank you. The pleasure was mine, Quinn replied. He hesitated, then added, I have to go to Denver next week on business. Would you keep an eye on the ranch for me? Just ride out every couple of days to make sure the stock is all right. My neighbor Johnson will handle the daily chores, but an extra pair of eyes would be welcome. Of course, Mabel agreed, touched by his trust in her. Quinn left for Denver on Monday, promising to return by the weekend. Mabel rode out to his ranch on Tuesday and Thursday, finding everything in order. Johnson, an elderly man from the next property over, reported no sign of the Harmon brothers. On Friday afternoon, Mabel decided to make one final check before Quinn's expected return the next day. As she approached the ranch, she immediately sensed something was wrong. The front door of the cabin stood open, and she could hear banging from inside. Dismounting cautiously, Mabel tied her horse to a tree and crept closer. Through the window, she could see Edgar and his brothers ransacking the cabin. They were pulling up floorboards, tearing open the mattress, clearly searching for something. It's got to be here somewhere, Edgar was saying. Davidson wouldn't have left without it. Maybe he took it with him, the youngest brother suggested. Told you we should have searched the place before Vaughn moved in, the middle brother complained. Mabel backed away, intending to ride for the sheriff when a twig snapped beneath her boot. The sound seemed to echo in the sudden silence. Someone's out there, Edgar hissed. Mabel ran for her horse, but she wasn't fast enough. Edgar caught her before she could mount, his grip bruising on her arm as he spun her around. Well, well, he sneered. Vaughn's woman, come to check on his property. Let me go, Mabel demanded, trying to hide her fear. Bring her inside, Edgar ordered his brothers. She might know where it is. They dragged Mabel into the cabin and forced her into a chair. The place was in shambles. Quinn's few possessions scattered, furniture overturned. "Where's the map?" Edgar demanded. "What map?" Mabel asked, genuinely confused. "Don't play dumb." Edgar leaned close, his breath reeking of whiskey. "Davidson had a map showing where he hid the gold. Where is it?" "I don't know anything about any map or gold," Mabel insisted. "I'm just here to check on the animals." Edgar slapped her, the force snapping her head to the side. "Try again." The blow stunned Mabel, but it also ignited something inside her. She was tired of being afraid, tired of men who thought they could hurt her without consequences. "Quinn will kill you if you touch me again," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Edgar laughed. "Vaughn's in Denver. By the time he gets back, we'll be long gone with you and the gold." "Edgar, maybe she really doesn't know," the youngest brother said nervously. "Shut up, Lyle," Edgar snapped. "We'll wait for Vaughn. He knows where it is." They tied Mabel to the chair and continued searching the cabin. Hours passed and darkness fell. The brothers argued among themselves, drinking from a bottle they'd found in Quinn's cupboard. Mabel worked at her bonds, managing to loosen them slightly, but not enough to free herself. Fear and anger warred within her. She'd escaped one violent man only to find herself at the mercy of others. Perhaps this was her fate. No, she refused to accept that. Quinn had shown her kindness without demands. Mrs. Holloway had offered friendship without judgment. Nome had given her a chance at a new life. She wouldn't surrender that without a fight. As midnight approached, Mabel heard a horse approaching. The brothers tensed, readying their weapons. "That'll be Vaughn," Edgar said with satisfaction. "Lyle, get behind the door. Jackson, cover the window." The door opened slowly and Quinn stepped inside, immediately freezing at the sight of Mabel tied to the chair, her face bruised. "Let her go," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "This is between us." "Where's the map, Vaughn?" Edgar demanded, his gun pointed at Quinn's chest. "I don't know what you're talking about," Quinn said, his eyes never leaving Mabel's. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," Mabel managed, though tears threatened. "Davidson had a map to a gold cache," Edgar said impatiently. "Worth thousands. We know he had it when he sold you this place. If he had such a map, he didn't pass it to me," Quinn said evenly. "Now untie Miss Zimmerman." Edgar laughed. "You're not in a position to make demands." He pressed his gun to Mabel's temple. "Where's the map or your woman dies?" "She's not part of this," Quinn said, his calm facade cracking. "Let her go, and I'll help you search for whatever you're looking for." "Edgar," Lyle said nervously from his position by the door. "Maybe we should." He never finished his sentence. A shot rang out and Lyle crumpled to the floor. Sheriff Collins stood in the doorway, his rifle smoking. The distraction was enough. Quinn lunged at Edgar, knocking his gun away from Mabel's head. The two men crashed to the floor, grappling for control. Jackson turned to fire at the sheriff, but took a bullet to the shoulder instead. Mabel, forgotten in the chaos, managed to work one hand free and untied herself. She grabbed a heavy skillet from the overturned table and, seeing Quinn pinned beneath Edgar, brought it down hard on Edgar's head. He collapsed instantly. "Mabel," Quinn scrambled to his feet, gathering her into his arms. "Are you hurt?" "Just bruised," she assured him, allowing herself to lean into his strength. Sheriff Collins secured the surviving Harmon brothers while Quinn examined Mabel's injuries. His gentle touch on her bruised cheek made her wince. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "This is my fault." "How is it your fault?" Mabel asked. "I asked you to check on the ranch, put you in danger." Quinn's eyes were tormented. "If anything had happened to you." "But it didn't," Mabel said firmly. "I'm fine." Later, after the sheriff had taken the Harmons away, Law would survive his wound, though Edgar faced serious charges for kidnapping and assault. Quinn insisted on taking Mabel to Dr. Mitchell despite the late hour. There was never any map, was there? Mabel asked as they rode toward town. Not that I know of, Quinn replied, though Davidson was an odd sort, used to ramble about striking it rich someday. The Harmons believed it. Some men will believe anything if it promises easy money. Quinn's arm tightened around her waist where he held her in front of him on his horse. I was so afraid when I saw you in that chair. How did you know something was wrong? Mabel asked. I got back early and stopped at the boarding house. Mrs. Holloway said you'd gone to check on the ranch and hadn't returned. I had a bad feeling. Quinn's voice dropped. Mabel, when I thought they might hurt you, I realized something. What? Mabel asked, suddenly breathless. That I care for you, more than I thought possible after losing Sarah. He hesitated. I know you have reasons to be cautious with men. I can see it in your eyes sometimes, like you're remembering something painful. I don't expect anything from you, just wanted you to know. Mabel was silent, processing his words. After everything with Harold, she'd convinced herself she was unlovable, damaged, unworthy of tenderness. Yet here was this good man, offering his heart without demands. You don't have to say anything, Quinn added when her silence stretched. Just know that whatever happened before, it doesn't change how I see you, Doctor. Mitchell confirmed Mabel had no serious injuries, though the bruise on her cheek would take time to heal. Quinn insisted on escorting her back to the boarding house and watching until she was safely inside before reluctantly departing. Mabel barely slept that night, her mind churning with Quinn's confession and her own conflicted feelings. By morning, she'd made a decision. She found Quinn at his ranch, already working to repair the damage the Harmons had caused. He straightened when he saw her, uncertainty in his eyes. Mabel, I didn't expect I was married before, she blurted out, interrupting him. In Chicago. His name was Harold Beckman. He was cruel. He hurt me in ways I can't talk about. I ran away 3 years ago, got a divorce, and came west to start over. Quinn's expression softened with understanding. I suspected something like that. I've been afraid to trust anyone since then, Mabel continued, needing to get it all out. Convinced myself I was better off alone, but then you came along with your kindness and your patience and your goodness. Mabel, please let me finish. She took a deep breath. What I'm trying to say is, I care for you too, Quinn. It terrifies me, but it's true. The smile that broke across Quinn's face was like sunrise after the longest night. He stepped closer but didn't touch her. May I? He asked softly, reaching toward her hand. Mabel nodded, and Quinn's warm fingers closed gently around hers. We can take this as slow as you need, he promised. I'm not going anywhere. 2 months later, on a crisp October morning, Mabel stood in Mrs. Holloway's parlor wearing a new dress she'd sewn herself, cream-colored with lace trim. Through the window, she could see the small gathering in the garden: Sheriff Collins and his wife, Dr. and Mrs. Mitchell, Mrs. Peterson and her husband, and a few other townspeople who had become friends. Ready? Mrs. Holloway asked, adjusting Mabel's simple veil. I think so, Mabel said, surprised to find her hand steady. Is it too soon? We've only known each other 5 months. When it's right, Mrs. Holloway said confidently. That man worships the ground you walk on, and you light up like a lantern when he enters a room. Quinn was waiting in the garden, looking handsome and nervous in his new suit. His smile when he saw Mabel walking toward him was all the reassurance she needed. The ceremony was brief but meaningful. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Quinn's kiss was gentle, reverent, a promise of love without possession. Mrs. Vaughn, he whispered against her lips. Mr. Vaughn, she replied, smiling through happy tears. That night, in the newly repaired and expanded cabin that was now their home, Quinn was patient and tender, understanding Mabel's fears and hesitations. His touch healed something broken inside her, replacing painful memories with new ones filled with tenderness and respect. "I'll never hurt you," he promised as they lay together afterward. "Never try to own you or change you." "I know," Mabel said, and she did. Quinn had proven his character through actions, not just words. Life settled into a pleasant rhythm. Mabel continued her sewing, setting up a small workspace in the cabin. Quinn's ranch prospered, and by the following spring, they were discussing expansion. The Harmon brothers were long gone, Edgar sentenced to prison for his crimes, the others fleeing Colorado after their failed scheme. In April of 1880, Mabel discovered she was expecting their first child. Quinn's joy was tempered with concern for her health, but Dr. Mitchell assured them all was well. "You'll be a wonderful mother," Quinn told her one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, his hand resting gently on her growing belly. "How can you be so sure?" Mabel asked, voicing the fear that had been growing alongside their child. "My own mother died when I was young. I barely remember her. Because I've seen your strength, your kindness, your capacity for love despite everything you've endured," Quinn said simply. "Our child is blessed to have you." In November, after a difficult but ultimately successful labor, Matthew Quinn Vaughn entered the world, a healthy boy with his father's eyes and his mother's dark hair. "He's perfect," Quinn whispered, cradling his son with tears streaming unashamedly down his cheeks. Motherhood came more naturally to Mabel than she'd expected. The love she felt for her son was overwhelming, healing parts of her she hadn't realized were still wounded. As Matthew grew, so did the ranch. Quinn built a larger home beside the original cabin, which became Mabel's permanent sewing shop. Her skills had become renowned in the county, and women traveled from neighboring towns to commission her work. In the summer of 1882, Quinn's sister Elizabeth came to visit from Texas, bringing her 2 children. Watching Quinn with his niece and nephew, Mabel felt blessed all over again by the family they were building. "You've done well for yourself, big brother," Elizabeth told Quinn one evening as they all sat around the fire. "When you left Texas, I worried you'd never recover from losing Sarah and little Thomas." "Grief doesn't ever leave completely," Quinn said, his eyes finding Mabel's across the room. "But love makes room for it, gives it a place to exist without consuming you." "Poetic for a cowboy," Elizabeth teased, but her eyes were approving as she looked between them. That winter brought heavy snow and the gift of another pregnancy. This time, Mabel faced the prospect with confidence rather than fear. "Another boy, do you think?" Quinn asked as they lay in bed listening to the wind howl outside. "A girl, I think," Mabel replied, guiding his hand to the spot where their child kicked energetically. "Strong like her father." Quinn kissed her tenderly, and brave like her mother. Emma Rose Vaughn arrived in July 1883, a fighter from her first breath. Dr. Mitchell declared her the healthiest baby girl he'd delivered that year. Life wasn't always easy. There were difficult seasons, drought one year that threatened the cattle, a fever that swept through Nome taking several lives including dear Mrs. Holloway, a fall that left Quinn with a broken leg just before roundup time. But through it all, their love remained steadfast. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Quinn surprised Mabel with a small gold locket containing miniature portraits of Matthew and Emma. "To keep them close to your heart," he said as he fastened it around her neck. "They already are," Mabel replied, touching the precious gift. "Along with you." Quinn's hand covered hers. "Do you ever regret it? Marrying a simple rancher, you could have had an easier life." Mabel shook her head firmly. "I had easier once. A fine house in Chicago, pretty dresses, social standing, and I was miserable, afraid every day." She met his gaze directly. "With you, I found something I never thought possible, a love that sees me truly, accepts me completely, and never quits, even when times are hard. Even when you're stubborn as a mule, Quinn teased gently. Even then, Mabel laughed. And the same goes for you, Quinn Vaughn. I've seen you at your worst, covered in mud from chasing strays in a thunderstorm, cranky from lack of sleep when the children were teething, frustrated when the bank threatened to call in our loan last year. Not my finest moments, Quinn admitted. But I loved you through all of them, Mabel said softly, and I always will. As the children grew, so did Nome. The railroad came through in 1885, bringing new opportunities and growth. Quinn and Mabel discussed moving to a larger town where the children would have better educational opportunities. But in the end, they chose to stay, helping to build the community that had embraced them both. Quinn served 2 terms as mayor, working to bring a proper school to town. Mabel taught sewing classes to young girls and helped establish the town's first lending library. Their home became a gathering place for community celebrations and a safe haven for those in need. In 1889, at the age of 34, Mabel gave birth to their 3rd child, a son they named James after Quinn's father. Though the doctor warned against more pregnancies given her difficult labor, Mabel considered their family complete and perfect as it was. Matthew grew into a thoughtful young man with his father's skill with animals and his mother's eye for detail. Emma developed a talent for storytelling and a fierce independence that both worried and delighted her parents. Young James, with his sunny disposition, was beloved by everyone in town. On Mabel's 40th birthday in 1895, Quinn organized a surprise celebration at their ranch. Friends from throughout their years in Nome gathered to honor the woman who had overcome so much and given so generously to others. "A toast," Quinn said, raising his glass, "to my wife, who taught me that life doesn't end with loss but begins again with love." As Mabel looked around at the faces of friends and family, her children now 14, 12, and 6, she marveled at the journey that had brought her here. From the frightened, broken woman who'd arrived in Nome certain she was unlovable, to this moment of abundant joy. That night, as she and Quinn sat on their porch watching the stars appear, Mabel leaned her head against his shoulder. "Do you remember what you told me the day after the Harmons attacked?" she asked. "That I cared for you," Quinn guessed. "After that, you said whatever happened before wouldn't change how you saw me." Mabel turned to look at him, this man who had kept every promise he'd ever made to her. "You gave me the greatest gift that day." "What was that?" Quinn asked, his arm tightening around her shoulders. "Hope," Mabel said simply. "When I'd convinced myself I was unworthy of love, you showed me I was wrong. Your love never quit, even when I pushed you away." Quinn brushed a strand of silver-streaked hair from her face. "Loving you has been the easiest thing I've ever done, Mabel Vaughn. And the bravest," she countered. "You risked your heart when it had already been broken once. Some things are worth the risk." Quinn kissed her gently. "Some people, too." As they sat together watching the moon rise over the mountains, Mabel thought about the scared young woman she'd once been, and the journey that had brought her here to this man, these children, this life full of love she'd never believed possible. The scars from her past remained, but they no longer defined her. Quinn had shown her a different kind of love, patient, respectful, unwavering. A love that saw her wounds but focused on her strength. A love that never quit, not through hardship or fear or doubt. A love that, against all odds, had made her whole again.